Yeah. Hi, everyone. Rage the Caged Chano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Power Trip album, Nightmare Logic. Power Trip is a Dallas, Texas band. This is their second album. It's also their second album for Southern Lord Records. I once caught these guys down at South by Southwest where they did one of the most badass, spin kick worthy sets I had heard all that week. But then I was a little let down once I actually heard their debut album and found that the recording was nowhere near as powerful as the live show. Mostly because I thought some of the tracks on here sounded a little washed out, a little too reverby, even though I kind of understood that the sound came with the territory the band was playing in, this underground 80s crossover thrash style. And that's still kind of the case on this new album over here. It's very atmospheric, but the guitars and the drums are a little heavier, have a bit more clarity to them, the vocals more upfront, the lyrics are actually readable at some points. And even though the band has this newfound clarity on this album, they're still bringing a pretty old school sound. I was instantly reminded of another thrash revivalist album that I had reviewed recently, that new Iron Reagan album, Crossover Ministry. By comparison, that album is much more modern, much more cleanly produced, way punchier, way heavier, way more compressed. All good things, but also things that led to the album feeling kind of one-dimensional. Power Trip's sound, by comparison, is not as cleaned up. It's way more raw. It's a little smudgier, and I think the end result, in a way, is a little better, because the band manages to capture this wild, relentless energy that made so many of those crossover thrash records from the 80s and 90s so good, even if the final result is kind of old-fashioned. Now, even though on this record we are hearing a blend of thrash metal and hardcore punk, Power Trip does not bring the political commentary or the sense of humor or the punk attitude that a lot of those thrash crossover bands did. Instead, Power Trip try to give their music as dark and as gruesome a presentation as humanly possible. In a way, it kind of reminds me of that band Toxic Holocaust. That's the only other thrash metal contemporary I could think of that has a similarly devilish sound. Power Trip's sound comes more from the depths of hell than it does from the mean streets of LA or New York, from a bunch of guys wearing jean shorts and bandanas. All that being said, Power Trip I still think has a ways to go to hammer out a distinct sound in this genre of music, in a way that almost seems to be the point with how meat and potatoes the band's approach is on this album. But unlike most thrash revivalists that I hear these days, I wasn't completely underwhelmed by this album. It was pretty exciting from front to back. Loads of adrenaline, loads of blood, loads of guts, splattered in every direction. The performances on this thing are electrifying, from the enraged vocals, even if they are a little ordinary. The drums do a fantastic job of just pushing, propelling the instrumentation on top of them like a semi going full speed with the brake lines cut, and the guitar riffs all over this thing are fucking awesome. They have this groovy chunkiness to them that reminds me of some of Anthrax's best releases from back in the day, but of course these guitar riffs are executed with the speed and aggression that only a punk could love. The guitar solos are pretty good for the most part, and Power Trip don't really give themselves enough time on this album to really get boring or wear their welcome. This thing is just 33 minutes long, which is spread across 8 tracks, and pretty much every song takes the same blitzkrieg songwriting style. The song Ruination, for example, with the exception of a few spots to sort of just give some breathing room to build tension until the next onslaught of riffs and drums. This track does not let up. This song will do to a mosh pit what a giant canister of gasoline will do to a wildfire, which is much the case for the rest of the tracks on this album too, most of which segue into each other pretty smoothly, making this album a pretty seamless listen. Overall, this album flows pretty well. I love the sound, I love the production, I love the performances on this thing, and the energy the band brings on here is just incredible. Even if, on the whole, this album is just a little run-of-the-mill by thrash metal comparisons, when you're looking at the genre, I'm feeling a light 7 on this record. Tran.
Hey, Zishin, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe. And please don't die, because if you die, you can't watch my videos anymore. Power Trip, Nightmare Logic. Get this bitch on Southern Lord Records forever.